We are Antonia,
Vesna,
Neil,
and Igor, and you're listening to Mora FM.
at Glasgow Worldcon 2024.
Yes, 2024.
Okay, so we are recording a very special episode with our guest. So Neil, would you like to say a few words about yourself to our audience? Who are you? What are you doing? And so on.
Sure. My name's Neil Williamson. I'm a Scottish science fiction, fantasy and horror writer from Glasgow in Scotland. And I'm very tired.
It's day 5.
It's day 5. We've all been working very hard. I've been on 8 program items and I'm really tired. Yeah, talking about Scottish science fiction, which is fantastic.
So you're the person to talk to.
I'm Mr. Scott, partly.
Good, because it would be a really awkward episode.
How does it feel to represent all of the Scottish SFF?
It's a little pressure. I can't lie. Yeah.
Did you volunteer or
Nope.
did some?
Well, yes. I mean, the way that the programs are populated by panelists at Worldcon is that you go on the website, you express an interest in being on some aspect of the program, and then they send you a link to a form that you go through, and you say this is how much I'd be willing to do, like maybe one panel a day, maximum of 1 panel the whole thing. I didn't do that. I was a little bit more ambitious, and then at the end of that they send you a list of all the things they're thinking of doing, and you can say I would like to do, you can't, it's not exhaustive, you can only say I want to do a few things, but you put them in order of what you fancy. And foolishly I said, well, maybe I should be on some of the Scottish ones, that would be quite nice. I'm not on all the Scottish ones, it's been spread quite widely, but I got my fair share.
Okay.
And I feel like I've done my work.
Yeah, well, definitely, yeah. You can now do a whole lecture at a college on just on Scottish science fiction.
No, by tomorrow I will have forgotten it all.
Just erased from the memory.
Yeah.
What were you most surprised with people not knowing about the Scottish sci-fi fantasy scene? Was there anything that the audience surprised you with?
I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. I think the main thing is that we have a lot of writers in Scotland who haven't quite made it, certainly to being well known outside of Scotland, or at least as far down as London. Some have. Because some wonderful writers like Eliza Chan, who's a fantasy writer originally from Dumbarton near Glasgow, whose first book, novel Fathomfolk, was published earlier this year and became a Sunday Times bestseller.
Wow.
And she's doing really well. She's got a new book deal that she's very excited about, obviously. She's very excited about, and everyone knows about Eliza all of a sudden. There are loads of other good writers who are starting to be better known further afield. There's a caveat to that though. We do go out to Scotland sometimes. So
You go south.
we go south. There are other conventions. There's 2 big ones in the UK. There's Eastercon, which is the British Science Fiction Association convention, and then there's Fantasycon, which is the British Fantasy Society convention. So one's in spring and one's in autumn, which is great because you don't want to see each other more than twice a year most of the time. But the guys from Glasgow certainly go down. There's a good dozen of us, maybe 16 of us, all go down, not in a big car all together, but we all go down and attend these things, and we've got a presence. People know who we are, and they know who to look out for, and we have connections. It's Scotland's relationship with England and the English publishing scene. It's not a hard border. We're all connected. We're all friends. We're all throughout the UK in the fantasy and science fiction scene. So it's not like anyone from England doesn't know who we are. People from America, it's more difficult. I mean, there's a lot of people from America won't know who some of the published by the Big 5 publishers, who some of the authors published by them are. It's all new to them. What I really loved about them was their enthusiasm and desire to learn. I had a table talk.
Well, you've made it.
And someone came to it, which is even better. a friend of mine turned up. I didn't know he was going to turn up, and I was like, oh, okay, thanks, Alistair. That was nice. But another guy, a really nice chap called Lee, and he'd come from Philadelphia, having read my books, and he's been to Scotland several times. He's been to Glasgow 3 times before this. Loves it over here, and he read my book, my first novel, The Moon King, which is kind of loose fantasy Glasgow, right? And he was full of questions about how much of Glasgow is in this. How did you take that, what's around us, and make it into a novel? That's a lovely thing, right? So someone comes 3,500 miles, not just to talk to me, but one of the things that's on his itinerary for the convention is to say, I want to go to Neil's tabletop. So that was lovely. And then Alistair Reynolds came over and joined us for a bit as well, and that was lovely as well. He's a lovely man.
So, what would you say the new Scottish writers, do they have, and how many, maybe, do they have some specific problems, maybe when they want to start publishing, and do you have some specific publishers that are just for the science fiction and fantasy, or do you need to try and get your work with the more general publishers?
There are enough 2 levels of this. In the big professional side of things, there are enough science fiction and fantasy specialist imprints of the big publishers that there are plenty of places you can send your work that is just science fiction and fantasy. The general publishers usually won't look at it, but sometimes will. So you're actually restricted to the science fiction and fantasy publishers. A little bit further down we have the independent presses, so you'll see them in the dealer's room, Lunar Press and Yukon Press and those kind of places. They're brilliant little hard-working enthusiasts. They produce books and books and books because they love it. They're not doing it really obviously they want to be in profit, but they want to be in profit so they can make more books. They've not got shareholders to satisfy in terms of the computer saying that's not enough sales, we can't take that author on.
The algorithm.
Exactly, the algorithm. So you have these guys who will take a project on because it's cool and it's different. It might not be very commercial, and very often that's why it comes to them, because the bigger publishers are too much of a risk, right? Might not sell that well. But we have that double layer, which is absolutely invaluable, and that's part of what makes the British. That's the heart of the British publishing culture for science fiction and fantasy. It's a real big part of it.
I noticed that you have anthology with Luna Press. You are the editor, co-editor of
co-editor.
Co-editor, yeah.
Right.
So the Nova Scotia Volume 2.
That's right.
And was it an edition especially made for Worldcon, or did you plan to do it regardless?
Especially for Worldcon. My co-editor, Andrew J. Wilson, and I, this is going to surprise you, we created a book before that called Nova Scotia.
Wouldn't have thought of it.
Right? And when we're thinking of a title for this one, it's kind of easy, right?
And I just thought that the Volume 2 was just an interesting add-on.
No relation to the first year.
Have people searching the internet for years looking for Volume 1? It doesn't exist. No, it does exist. Well, we created that book for the 2005 Worldcon, which was here in Glasgow. And it had some lovely authors in it, a mix of famous authors and not famous authors. We had, do you know the Finnish writer Hannu Rajaniemi? You know Hannu?
Yeah, Quantum Thief.
Yeah. We published his first story in that anthology. Hannu was living in Edinburgh at the time. So we had a great time with that. It did very well for the publisher, and it was a World Fantasy Award finalist as well that year. Some years later, we hear that Worldcon is coming back to Glasgow, and I immediately went, right, I'm going to do another book. I'll see if Andrew wants to do it, but I'm going to set it up so we're doing it anyway. I persuaded Andrew to do it, and I persuaded Francesca Barbini, who is the publisher at Luna. It wasn't a hard conversation, let me tell you. It was, Francesca, we're going to do a Nova Scotia Volume 2, do you want to do it? Yes, please. That was it. She's a lovely woman, she works really hard. And she's super professional, and it's a joy to work with her. But it was really easy to get that rolling, and then by that point I already had a list of authors I wanted to invite as well. So it was super easy to fill it up with good stories as well.
So was it an invite-only anthology, or did you have also like an open call?
It was sort of, right? It was invite only, apart from some of the invites went to writers' groups. So you could just say to those groups, anyone from this group can send us a story. And we asked a lot of writers, and some of them weren't able to do it, which is a shame, because certainly a couple I had in my mind that it would be great if they sent me a story, but we didn't get them. But that's anthology editing.
Yeah.
You can't get everything you want. Everything we did get really surpassed my expectations. I think it's a considerably better book than Nova Scotia Volume 1 in terms of its quality of writing, variety and diversity of story and author, and its political engagement with where Scotland is now and where it could be in the future. There are a lot of destroyed Edinburghs in that book. Edinburgh's destroyed many times over in that book.
Is it?
As a Glaswegian, that's fine. That's not a problem.
So in Croatia, a lot of our authors, when they write really depressing sort of stories, melancholic, and like a lot of dystopias. Would you say that Scottish writers are similar, like more on the dark, depressing side, or?
I think there's a variety. I think naturally, historically, Scottish writing has been quite depressing like that. It's been quite introspective, looking into the darkness of the soul kind of thing. We're in the winter here. We have a lovely sunny day today. You notice, right? You notice that other days weren't quite so sunny.
Yeah.
Now, so it's a similar mix-up of weather in the winter, except that we only have 7 hours of daylight instead of 17 hours of daylight. Yeah. 7 hours of daylight, as long as it's not cloudy. If it's cloudy, it doesn't even feel like it's daylight at all. So you can imagine how that feels to the national psyche. It's like there's a lot of staying inside. Alcohol may be involved. The serious point of that is the rate of depression, especially in men, young men, is really quite high. And it's similar to a country like Finland as well, which is quite a northern country. A lot of drinking and a lot of difficulty with male mental health. So it's understandable that especially male Scottish writers tend to be a bit, the word we have is dour, D-O-U-R, a little bit, down. Yeah.
And what would you say about subgenres? Do you have some that are more popular than the others? Like, I don't know, in Croatia we have a lot of, like Vesna said, dystopias or alternative histories or some type of...
I have an add-on. You said you were a Scottish horror writer, among other things.
So.
Is there a lot of horror in Scotland, or like?
And is there folk horror? Because for me, I'm a folk horror fan and a writer, and Scotland has really beautiful landscapes that feel really like it could be inspiring to write folk horror.
Well, the answer to that is kind of yes, and I'm going to tell you something in a minute that kind of turns that around a little bit. There isn't a subgenre of Scottish horror specifically. The interests are the same as they are in England and the rest of the UK and in America. I don't think there's anything particularly Scottish about horror or fantasy. If you're writing about the country itself, if your location is the Scottish Central Belt, the urban, or somewhere in the mountains or the Highlands or anything like that, then it feels more Scottish, obviously. But that's just a story set in Scotland. It's not essentially a Scottish story, I wouldn't say. There are people doing it. My mind is blanking.
No, it's fine.
But we certainly have. It's ripe for independent filmmakers who like to make little independent films, and folk horror is certainly one of the things that's quite easy to do because you don't need that much in the way of props and
You
stuff.
just have to go outside and not wear like jeans.
You just need dark woods, practically.
So I have started writing. I started getting into folk horror, and I'm thinking about it a lot at the moment. I have a story coming out in an anthology next year.
If it's been announced, we're going to link it in the story, in the show notes.
I can't remember the title, but it's in my social media.
Okay.
Which is it's a folk horror story set in the Highlands. So it's set in it's not arboreal. It might be arboreal. It's called. It's all folk horror stories that are set in woods around the world, woods and forests around the world.
That's cool.
So I chose the Caledonia forest, which is like thousands of years old, right? So it's one of those.
Perfect.
That's one of
Perfect
those things.
setting. Yeah.
If you wanted if you had a person who's never heard of you and who's never tried a Scots author, which book, I mean yours, as for this question, would you like recommend to them?
It depends what they're looking for, because my books are quite varied.
Something they would like. Sorry, I've worked in a library for 10 years.
It depends. It depends on the person, doesn't it? So my first two novels, I want to go back to folk horror in a second, right?
Okay.
But my first two novels are you might call them science fantasy. They're fantasy with engineering again, or science fiction with fantasy elements. One of the two. One's a bit more one is a bit more the other. The first book's called The Moon King, which is set on an island, which is a city on it, and the moon never sets around the island. There's a machine in the heart of the city that keeps the moon in orbit around the island, and there's a king who never dies. It's a parable of conservatism. Everything that happens in the city is linked to the phases of the moon, and that's everything from how fresh your food keeps. You know, the full moon, everything's lovely, tastes beautiful. The dark of the moon, everything's going rotten like super fast. You know, and same with people's moods. And so the mood of the place is very much like Scotland in miniature, right? And that's what I said to this fellow Lee when he was asking about it. It's a seasonal, but it's like a seasonal thing within a month, where everyone's goes from super happy to super depressed together in one place. And the story is what happens when the machine that holds the moon and therefore the system together starts to fail. So that's one I would recommend. If you prefer horror, I have a novella out earlier this year called Charlie Says.
Somebody mentioned it on a panel I was on. I think you weren't.
Yeah. Was it E. Saxey? Ellis Saxey?
Very possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were on the folklore panel too.
Yeah.
Very, very possibly. There was a call for recommendations.
I see.
Yeah, because
I just
Says,
remembered.
is it It's Charlie.
Yeah. I was a panelist and that really stressed out, so I only heard half of the story, but yeah.
It's so hard to not just listen to your own thoughts on the panel.
Yeah.
So Charlie Says is it's very difficult to explain to people who aren't even in my age group in the UK, but in the 70s and 80s growing up, we had a lot of little films, little adverts on TV warning kids not to do things. Like don't play with matches, crossing the road, don't run on beaches with super sharp glass bottles, don't play near lakes with evil monsters in them, all that sort of thing. And my age group in the UK recognises now that we've all grown up mentally scarred, and that's why so many of us are horror writers. It was happening at the same time as the height of the Cold War threat of nuclear war. We had TV spots again and leaflets through the door telling us what to do in the event of a nuclear war. It was a really dark time. So this novella taps into all of that in a folk horror way. But, and this takes me on to what I was going to say a minute ago, which is a good link. It's an urban folk horror, not a rural folk horror. And this is what I'm kind of working with at the moment with what I'm writing. I've got a novel planned, which is going to be set in London, which is going to be an urban folk horror novel set in London. And the idea is, what if you take the elements of folk horror, like an isolated community or an unwelcoming community, what is difficult for you to access, like the financial district perhaps, or a weird part of suburbia, or a ghettoized bit that you don't normally go to. What if it's full of unwelcoming people? What if they have rituals you don't understand? You get that in urban environments as much as you do in rural environments, and that's what I'm playing with just now. So.
That's a very interesting concept, because we usually go always for the rural, but as you said, it's not.
I'm convinced the popularity of folk horror just now is because people who live in towns are a little bit afraid of the country.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I grew up in the country, so what's the matter with you all? We're not all like that.
Yeah. Or the nature for people who grew up in towns, just to go out and be completely lost somewhere. So there is also the fear of nature, not just the rural areas. As
Nature's
such.
a thing that's so hard to control, you know. If you walk around Glasgow, one of the nicknames of Glasgow is Deer Green Place. It comes from the Gaelic word Glashú, Deer Green Place, and it's because stuff grows here really fast.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
We've seen it walking the streets.
Yeah?
Yeah. Every other building that's closed has like tiny ferns and stuff.
Yeah, trees going out the side of the building, you know, because the pigeons come across and drop seeds and stuff, and they just grow.
It's beautiful to me, but it's also very frightening in a way if you remember that we are the new ones.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. We're the invaders. It looks in moments that as if nature is trying to reclaim the city.
Yeah, and we're that far away from it happening. All we have to do is, stop spraying it with weed killer or whatever, just for 5 minutes, and
because of all the moisture.
yeah, it's all it's rain. You've seen that while you're here, right?
Yeah, we saw it. There was a joke during the lockdowns, like nature is healing, because as soon as we all had to just get inside our houses and there was no one outside and doing nothing, and suddenly there were wild animals everywhere, at least in Croatia.
Wild animals everywhere. Dolphins returned to Venice. The canals in Venice cleared. But I mean, we laugh, but after that first month of lockdowns, the first day we could go out, me and my sister went for a walk, and the air was so clear. The only time ever before that I saw air that was so clear was we get these really strong winds occasionally, like 180 plus kilometers per hour. They'll blow for one day, and then it'll clear out the air. That's the only other times I've seen the air that clear. It's cool, but also frightening.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. The only other time it was like that in Glasgow. There was a winter, maybe about 10 years ago now, and there was a winter storm that came in from the steppes, came from the east. They called it the Beast from the East, and it was like a post-apocalyptic. The city streets were just piled with snow, and we never had that in Glasgow. I can walk to work. I'm not that far from work, but I was one of 3 people that made it into work only because I was walking. And it was so surreal, so quiet.
Did you have any work that day? Or you were just like, why did I come here?
Yeah. Alas, I had work that day. That was the real horror.
Okay, so let's get back a bit to the recommendations. So we heard about your books, and do you have...
and about Nova Scotia's Volume 2.
Volume 2, which we heard now that it's better than Volume 1 that also exists.
In my mind, yeah, definitely.
So who do you also recommend for us to read?
Well, Nova Scotia was one of 2 anthologies I launched this weekend. The other one is called Gallus, which is an anthology of stories by Glasgow writers, who are all part of my writers group. That was a real special one to do because maybe a quarter to a third of the stories in that book is their first published story, and we worked super hard on them, and they worked super hard to polish the stories up and be brave enough to send it in the first place, because this is the first chance of publication.
Such a big launch for those people.
Yeah, it was superb, and my abiding memory that I will take away is seeing those guys just super enthused and so excited, people coming around and just thrusting book after book under their face. Both the launches were really popular, they were really full, and we sold out of all the books by I think Saturday night. I think all the books were gone by then, so that's a win.
Congrats.
Yeah. Well, we sold out. The problem with Gallus was, Gallus is a Scots word again. Scots word. It's a bit cheeky, but a little bit dangerous at the same time, right?
Okay.
It's necessary to be dangerous.
Yeah, right. The one with that is that most of the contributors hadn't got their copy yet because we had to sell them. So that's definitely a win. But now I need to order more. So
we need to talk to them to say why.
They were cool. I promise. They'll never hear this, right? So, so other recommendations. I would love you to find the books of Eliza Chan, Fathomfolk. Cameron Johnston, his new book it was mentioned on that panel, The Last Shield, which he describes as Die Hard in a castle.
Oh, that's something interesting.
Yeah, Lorraine Wilson is superb. She's very various. She does a bunch of different things. So each book is different, but she's a wonderful writer. Let me see. David Goodman from Edinburgh. He's an interesting writer. You'll find his stories in Clarkesworld. His first novel is coming out in September, I think. But it's a spy thriller. So if you like that, it's not science fiction, but it's a spy thriller. Novellas, there's a lady called Rhiannon Grist, who you might have seen around. She has blue hair. She's a Welsh lady with blue hair. She lives in Edinburgh. She had a book called Queen of the High Fields, which is a kind of folk horror-y thing set on an island off the coast of Wales. That won the British Fantasy Award last year. E.M. Faulds, Beth Faulds, her collection Under the Moon won the British Fantasy Award last year. She's an Australian writer that lives near Glasgow. Kat Hellisen, C.L. Hellisen, South African writer, lives in Fife, near Edinburgh. A lot of really interesting books. Pick up their books. T.L. Huchu, one of our guests here, Tendai, lovely boy.
I read his The Library of Death.
Yeah, he's great. I really like his stuff as well. So
for some reason, even though I read his book set in Edinburgh, I was like, oh, American author.
No, very much not. And he really. There's a story in Nova Scotia that he contributed called The Donkey. It's quite dark, actually. Okay. It blends Zimbabwean fantasy with the story of someone who emigrates from a small village and brings with them the expectations and the guilt of having to be the spokesperson, but also financial funnel from coming to the UK. Always getting messages from the family: don't forget your niece's education, school fees. Don't forget your aunt's funeral. Don't forget someone's got hospital bills. And it's a story about expectation to support everyone now you've gone to the UK. It's really grim. It's brilliant. It's lovely. So it's a bit different to Library of the Dead, but it's a really interesting story.
The library also gets a bit dark in some elements. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. You mentioned that you speak Scots.
Yeah.
Do you also write in Scots?
I was on a panel about the panel we mentioned about minority, or we call them minorized languages, because the
deliberation is important.
Yeah, exactly. The intention was to stop us speaking them. I don't usually write entirely in Scots. What I do is bring Scots words and phrases into the English, depending on who the characters are, where it's set. If they're Glasgow characters, they'll definitely speak like Glasgow people, which may be a problem with English editors and American editors, because they don't understand the rhythm as much.
It's harder to edit.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. In Glasgow, one of the things we do is often put the word "but" at the end of the sentence. You might say "anyway," are you going to do that anyway? Are you going to do that? But it's almost like a.
Sounds like an opening for something else.
Yeah, exactly, and it feels weird to anyone who doesn't use that phraseology. There's a phraseology that's if I'm talking to you and I'm telling you about a conversation I had in the past, and it was potentially an antagonistic, an argument conversation, I would say, and I was like that, and I was like that, right? In Glasgow, and I was like that, and then I'll say what I said. So it's like saying I said, "Go home, you're drunk." And then she said, "No, I'm not. I'm perfectly sober. Thank you very much." So it'd be, I was like that. "Go home, you're pissed." And she was like that. Oh, can I swear?
Yeah, we do. We do it all the time.
She was like that. "Fuck off. I'm perfectly fine." It's that kind of thing. But that kind of phraseology to an English or American editor, they have no clue what to do with it. So when you get the pushback, you just have to say, "No, that's staying," because that's exactly how people speak here. So I like it when Americans and English people come here, so they can wander around and soak it all in and go, "Oh, I know what he's talking about now. Yeah, I get it." But we code switch all the time, and Scots is a different language to Scottish English. I'm speaking Scottish English just now.
You're translating for us.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't. Both languages live in you at the same time. I'm not translating. It's like
you're speaking the other one.
They overlap.
Yeah.
And depending on who I'm speaking to, my words will change. The words I'm using will change, but I'm still saying the same thing. So, yeah. We grow up with two languages in our heads, and if you grow up Gaelic, then you grow up with three languages in your head potentially. It's interesting.
Yeah. there's a really popular TikToker. I don't know if you know her. Young woman. She does the Scots words of the day.
Oh, it's Pennie, isn't it?
Pennie,
yeah.
Oh God, Pennie something. I follow her on TikTok. I just
MissPunnyPennie.
yes.
Yeah. Pennie, she's amazing.
Yeah.
We all love her. We love her to bits. And the words she chooses are fantastic as well.
So she gets a stamp of approval.
Yeah. No, she's totally legit. She's fantastic. She's had a hard time and she needs a lot of support. So it's great that she's doing what she's doing.
People have been extra horrible to her lately.
It's awful. Yeah.
But I found personally really interesting what she's doing, and it was.
Well, she is a linguist. I mean,
Yeah.
she knows what she's talking about. So.
And her poetry is also. I'm not a big person on poetry, but when she does it and she performs it, it's really impactful. Yeah.
And you can tell when you listen to her poetry that it is a different language from Scottish English. It's not the same thing at all. There's overlap, but it's different. There's, do you know the novel Deep Wheel Orcadia? It won the Clark Award 2 years ago. It's by Harry Josephine Giles, who's a trans author from Edinburgh. It's a prose poem set in deep space, on a deep space station, that feels like a Orcadian. Orcadian is the adjective for people from Orkney.
Okay.
The Orkney Isles in the top, in the far north. An Orcadian fishing village. It feels like that. The community feels like a fishing village. And the way they published it was, on one side of the page you'd have the verse in Orcadian, which is a dialect of Scots, and then the other side you'd have it in English. So if you're not able to read the Scots that well, you could get the feel and then find out what it was actually about. The difficulty is, if you can speak Scots, and Orcadian has some vocabulary that I didn't know, but not very much, maybe 95% I could read quite fine. I'm reading the same thing twice.
Yeah.
I didn't read it in the print version. I read it in on Audible, which is Josie, the author, narrating it herself, and the way it's done there is a chapter at a time. And I could skip it, but you're getting one chapter. Oh, that's the story, and you're getting it again in English. It's quite a frustrating thing, but it's so beautifully read. You didn't mind too much. You know? It's a beautiful story, but it's a massively long science fiction space-based poem. It's a really interesting book.
So that's another recommendation.
Oh, 100%, yeah. Oh, and we may as well. This year's Clark Award winner was In Ascension by Martin McInnes, who Nina Allen mentioned on a panel I was on the other day, and it's brilliant as well. Very literary, so kind of literary with a bit of fantasy, or sci-fi kind of crossover, but very, very good.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, so we are also the editorial team of online magazine in Croatia, so I wanted to ask you about, do you have some specific Scottish online magazines for speculative fiction that we could check out?
There is. There's one called, I think it's called SF Caledonia.
Okay.
It's run by Noel Chidwick, who was the founder of Shoreline of Infinity, which is one of the stalls down there. Noel's been there all weekend. He's got an online magazine, and it's specifically Scottish writers. It's mostly reprints, but you'll get a good variety. There's one of mine down there. You'll get a good variety of things from there.
That's great. Thank
Good.
you. So you will have some closing questions.
I have a question. It's a meta question. Was there anything you were expecting us to ask you that we didn't, or whatever?
Yeah.
Nope.
Okay.
I mean, I really appreciate your interest in Scottish science fiction.
Something that I'm interested in because as a Scottish writer, and you've been in the game for a while.
Is what you're saying.
No.
I'm not as young as I look, maybe. Is Ian Banks still a great influence on Scottish writers, young ones, up-and-coming ones? Because I know he was a huge name. He and Ken MacLeod, but Ian Banks is the one that had most international recognition.
Yeah.
So.
I hope so. I don't know. The reason I'm hesitant over answering that is he's been dead for a few years now. He passed away a few years ago now. He used to be such a presence, like a living presence, when you went to events, that you couldn't not be inspired by him as a person, whether you read him or not. And I think there was a point where he was very much the person everyone who was a writer, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, looked up to in Scotland, without a doubt. I think now that he's been gone for a few years, we don't have that. And you are saying, well, do people read his work anymore in Scotland? Do the young team pick up his? I don't know if they do. I think I hope they do, because there's certainly lots to be inspired by. I'm more inspired by the non-science fiction side of his work, which I feel is adjacent to weird. You know, there's a kind of strangeness about them sometimes. That's more my kind of thing. On the other hand, I think the concerns of the writers these days, there's a lot more women and genderqueer authors writing, and their concerns are not the concerns that Banks had when he was writing. So I'm not sure he would necessarily be an influence, but I'm sure that where had he still been healthy and was still with us, he would definitely be supportive of their writing and the direction that progressive writing is going in Scotland, and there's a lot of it. He'd very much be a cheerleader for it. So, yeah.
It's really good to know.
Yeah.
Sounds very positive.
He was a very, very sound, politically sound man.
So what we do at the end of the episode with the guests, usually we ask our audience a question, so audience can answer us on email or on social media and such. And if we have a guest, then the guest has this opportunity to ask the question. So do you have a question you would ask Croatian audience?
Yeah. Where can I read your work? I would love to read Croatian science fiction and fantasy, and especially folk horror right now. I would love that. If it's at all available in English, I would love that. It might take me a while if I have to start learning Croatian now.
It's okay.
I've been learning German quite recently over the last few years.
We have some Croatian writers that write in English, and we have some Croatian writers that are being translated into English. So
yeah, you don't need to learn Croatian.
So yeah, no, please direct me to your work. I'd love to read it. That'd be amazing.
And where can we find you on social media?
Oh, you can find me on Blue Sky, mostly on Blue Sky these days, I would say. I deleted my Twitter account over a year ago. It's the best thing I ever did.
man.
Yeah. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm active on Blue Sky.
Blue Sky, okay. So you heard, send your Croatian recommendations to us, in English, yeah, so we can forward it to Neil. Thank you very much for this
so
talk.
much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. It's been brilliant. Loved it.
And good luck with the rest of the day. I hope you'll get finally a chance to rest.
Today's been good, actually, to be honest. I'm okay, but thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.